Good morning, everybody. So, my name is Stannard. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Petabridge. We're a company that helps .NET enterprises build highly available, distributed, real-time applications. And I'm a co-founder of the Akka.NET project, and as of yesterday, a DataStax MVP. Hooray! And so today we're going to talk about the new .NET stack. And so this talk is really about possibility and what's available to us in the .NET world that we've never had before. It's not really going to be a low-level like architecture talk or anything like that. It's going to be about, at a high level, what can we achieve for our users and our business with some of the new options and tools and choices that are available to us. So let me start by talking about the experience of being a .NET developer and what it's like. So just to share a little bit of my background with you. I started working in .NET in 2005 when I was a college intern working for Fair Isaac, the guys who do your FICO score and all that stuff. And I've been in .NET for 10 years. I've worked at Microsoft. I've started 3 companies on .NET, and I founded successful open source projects on it. I'm deeply committed to this ecosystem. It's the reason why I share all that. But one of the things that's been so about being a .NET developer is we have to play by this guy's rules. Every single time we want to go and do something in .NET, we have to have a license for Visual Studio or an MSDN subscription. We have to have licenses for Windows for our development workstations and licenses for Windows Server for our apps. We also have to buy SQL Server licenses and be really precise about the number of cores and the types of features we're going to need when we develop our apps. We also have to use Microsoft's web stack, ASP.NET and WCF, because everything in .NET runs through IIS and Windows Server. And so the ecosystem has been a place where you can really sum up the experience as you have to. You have to play by Microsoft's rules, or you have to go somewhere else. So let me share a little story with you briefly, just to illustrate the reality of this. So when I was working at Microsoft, this is like between 2010 and 2012, in early 2011, HTML5 APIs had all been fairly standardized, and browser vendors were rapidly trying to integrate them into their apps. And the most exciting one that got developers really going was WebSockets, because it enabled a whole bunch of scenarios that we could have never done before. Being able to have true server push inside a web application wasn't something we really had. And so everyone was rushing to try to get their hands on WebSockets as fast as they could. But .NET developers had a little problem that no one else had, which is that IIS 7 at the time did not support WebSockets. IIS 8 would, but that wasn't going to be shipped until Windows Server 2012. So every .NET developer who wanted to try to use WebSockets to deliver a better experience to their end users, they had to wait 12 to 18 months for a new version of Windows Server to come out at some yet to be determined price. So any .NET developer who was building like a real-time game or a social application or a live trading platform where they saw the inherent value in being able to support this API for their users had to make a choice between just waiting for Microsoft to get around to shipping a new version of their operating system or go somewhere else. And what inevitably happened as a result was tons of .NET developers in droves abandoned .NET and picked up Node.JS, the new cool kid on the block at the time, because they had a library called Socket.io, which was probably, still is, the best-in-breed WebSocket solution out there. And .NET developers have experienced this time and time again. In 2007, 8, and 9, when MVC was blowing up with Ruby on Rails, tons of .NET developers looked forlornly on the other side of the fence, wondering, I'd really love to have something as cool as CoffeeScript, or I'd love to be able to use asset bundling and all the other great innovations that came from that ecosystem. And then in my own personal experience, the last time I spoke at the Cassandra Summit in 2013, I was working for a startup I had founded called Marked Up. We were an analytics and marketing automation company. And anytime I wanted to use a big data technology like Cassandra or Storm or Solar, I had to end up writing driver code for all that stuff, because no one else in .NET cared enough to lead the way on that. And no one outside the .NET ecosystem cared about .NET developers. And that's what our experience has been like, where we are constantly forced to make the choice over and over again between the comfort and familiarity of Visual Studio and Windows and innovation. So we have to do all these things, or at least we did. The reality is that in the past couple of years, .NET's become an ecosystem where we actually have freedom and choice and power, and we can go and really deliver experiences beyond what we were limited to when it was just Microsoft's world. Microsoft, first and foremost, you heard Scott Guthrie on stage yesterday, they fully are committed to the idea that .NET has to be bigger than them in order for it to have a future. And .NET can no longer be coupled to Windows. So one of the things that's opening up for us is a possibility where we could build highly available distributed applications in pure C# and F#, using our favorite tools, whether it's Visual Studio or maybe even Sublime Text on OS X. And we can go and deploy those applications platform agnostically on Windows or on Linux. And we can use the most modern configuration management and deployment tools to do it. If I had brought up this possibility while I was at Microsoft back in 2012, I would have been sent to HR because they would have assumed I was smoking crack. But this is what is possible for us now in .NET. This is a future that we aren't going to have in 2 years. This is a future we have available to us starting right now. And that's what I'm going to share with you in today's talk. So let me introduce you to the new .NET Enterprise Stack. So the stack really begins with changing our mindset about what's possible for us and how we develop software as .NET developers. Moving from a fixed mindset, where we have a static view of what's possible and what we can do, to a growth-oriented mindset, where we experiment and try new things, and we aren't afraid of failure, because we look at that as valuable experience towards being better for our customers and developing our own careers. The next part of the .NET Enterprise Stack is Windows Azure. One of the most important changes in the way we develop and deploy software now is developers are increasingly becoming liberated from having to go to a provisioning team deep inside the bowels of their company and begging for VMs. With the advent of the cloud, and in particular Windows Azure, we have a playground where we can experiment and try new things rapidly at minimal cost. You saw Scott yesterday fire up a 90-node DSE cluster in like 3 clicks. That's amazing. You know how long it took me and my team to set up a test cluster using Hyper-V for DataStax Enterprise? Honestly, like 3 days to go and figure out all the different little things we had to do to go and make it work, and editing YAML files and all the rigmarole of manual DevOps. With Windows Azure, we have a possible future where we can rapidly try and test stuff and learn at a rate that is unprecedented for software developers. Speaking of DSE, the next part of our stack is the data stack. And one of the things that's really exciting about the way .NET is right now is every single major NoSQL database, whether it's Cassandra or MongoDB or React or others, they all treat .NET like big kids now. We're not relegated to the little kids table eating peanut butter and jelly at Thanksgiving anymore. We can sit with everybody else and actually enjoy first-party driver support now. So that's an amazing change. And what these technologies can make available for us is the possibility of having applications that can perform consistently well at any scale. As you heard Jonathan Ellis mention in his keynote yesterday, SQL Server and all of the old technologies that have gotten us from the 90s until now are built on a model that's fundamentally brittle. And that model is not going to keep growing with us. Customers demand a lot. They demand availability. They demand fast response times. And they demand a consistently good experience. And the tools we've been using, namely SQL Server, just aren't equipped to do that with the amount of things we developers are being asked to do. So we can use tools like Cassandra and Spark to really innovate at the data level and start with a healthy bedrock for building scalable, highly available applications in .NET. The next stack, and this is the piece that has me most excited about the future of .NET, is the application runtime. So quick show of hands here. Who's heard of Core CLR? Raise your hands. Okay, about a quarter of you. Core CLR is an initiative that's being developed by Microsoft right now that's designed to be cross-platform and Dockerizable. So it's a version of the .NET runtime that supports everything you need to deploy an ASP.NET or a Windows Service application. And I think they'll probably add support for WCF and other stuff too. But the idea is that we can actually have, from Microsoft, true cross-platform support for .NET and really make it a multi-platform runtime. And the other thing that's going on that's really exciting is what's happening with Mono. Since Unity 3D and Xamarin have become giants in the mobile space, Mono's gotten a level of innovation and support that it's never had before. And with Microsoft open sourcing the CLR recently, Mono 4.0, which came out earlier this year, actually boasts comparable performance to the CLR under a number of use cases now. That's never been the case in Mono's decade-long history. It's always been, the slightly laggy cousin of the CLR. But with the fact that Microsoft is opening up and sharing their technology, they're making the experience for .NET on platforms that aren't Windows better across the board. And lastly, well, actually, no, we have one more thing after that. The next stack here is our application stack and our programming model where we can innovate. So quick show of hands, who's heard of the actor model? All right, well, that's amazing. So are all of you .NET developers? I'm just going to go ahead and keep my fantasy here and assume yes. Yes, you all are. That's amazing. Akka.NET and Akka.cluster, which are implementations of the actor model, allow us to take the exact same sort of scalability characteristics that Cassandra has, the ability to be always up, the ability to add new hardware on demand, the ability to recover from failures gracefully. Akka.NET gives us all those benefits at our application layer too. And with it and its programming model, we can build applications that would have been considered impossible a couple of years ago. And I'm going to give you an example of that towards the end of this talk today. And lastly, the front end. So ASP.NET vNext and NancyFX are both extremely exciting in that they're cross-platform runtimes that allow us to use the best tools in front-end innovation. So a good example, I'm actually working on a NancyFX cross-platform app right now that is able to use Bower and TypeScript and able to use a bunch of JavaScript libraries and frameworks to really build a modern application. We can do that now anywhere in our front-end stack. We don't have to wait for Microsoft to go and add a little feature for us or ship a new version of ASP.NET. The state of the art is already such that we can use all of those tools inside our app and build the best possible experiences for our end users. So the future is bright with this new stack. We have the opportunity to improve and innovate and really create something new every single area in our technology stack. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits. Why do we want to do this? Why does this matter? So the first benefit is that we get to break free from the SQL Server contention pit of doom. So anyone who's built a sufficiently large application on top of SQL Server has run into this problem, where you had a data model and you had to go ahead and make the best assumptions you could at the very beginning of your application design process. And somewhere along the way, you started slapping on indexes for reporting purposes or whatever. And then maybe you had to add on another new feature. And then at some point down the road, you had to build a mobile app and your usage quintupled. And then at some point, you end up in this situation where you're giving my business partner, Andrew, a call saying, hey, yeah, we're losing tens of thousands of dollars a day now because we can't keep our data fresh anymore because of SQL Server contention and timeouts. One of the things this stack gives us the ability to do is break free from that model where there's any contention to begin with. Or we can go and use potentially multiple data technologies to accomplish different things. Jonathan in his keynote yesterday mentioned that one of the critical things we have to do as modern enterprises is segment our operational database away from our analytical and reporting database, that those are orthogonal concerns. And one of the things that's really easy to fall victim to in .NET is blending the two together. SQL Server Reporting Services is the ultimate gateway drug from that point of view. So one of the things that we can do with the new .NET stack is we can use Cassandra to have a really robust, linearly scalable operational database for supporting our apps that can give our users a consistently fast, good, and available experience. And then we can use Spark streaming to actually go and be able to do like streaming ETL workloads and gather all of our reporting metrics and maybe even finally write them back into SQL Server. So all the people in your operations, finance, sales, and marketing departments will be happy too, in addition to your users. So that's something that opens up as a result. The next is, with the advent of core CLR, the fact that Mono is being mature, and the CLR on Windows is still being innovated and improved upon at a faster and faster rate, is that we have total platform choice in how we develop our applications now. So you and your team can still use the tools you love. Personally, I'm useless without ReSharper. I am totally dependent on it. I'm like a turtle on my back when I don't have it available. So I can still develop my applications in Visual Studio using ReSharper and all my other little plugins I like to. And then I can deploy them onto Linux and expect similar performance and behavior. If I told you that a couple of years ago that would be possible, again, you would have not believed me. But this is the opportunity that's sitting right in front of us. And it's going to get better and better and better as the core CLR matures and as Mono begins to take on more of the open source benefits of the CLR now. So platform choice is a totally liberating option for .NET developers. And another quick show of hands. Who wants to be able to scale their applications without worrying about Windows licensing costs? All right, amen. Well, this is a future that's available to us now. If we can really get a hold of how to deploy and operate our software on Linux using technologies like Docker and some of the other new tools that Microsoft's introducing into Windows Azure, like Service Fabric, we can start to do some really cool stuff. The next piece, the tool chain. So we all love Visual Studio, and Microsoft did something recently that's really remarkable, which is they made Visual Studio Community Edition actually include all of the features that Pro used to have. Support for plugins, Code Lens, and a lot of the other tech tools that really allow us to be super productive in Visual Studio. Well, that's available for free now without an MSDN license. But on top of that, with Visual Studio Code, the new browser-based IDE they announced at Build Conference this year, we can actually develop our apps on OS X or Linux now, and then deploy them on Windows if we want. And then who can forget OmniSharp, the set of cross-platform development tools that Visual Studio Code uses. That can allow us to go and develop apps with full IntelliSense in IDEs like Vim or Sublime Text. So if you've got someone on your team who's, maybe they're a recovering Ruby programmer, and they really want to be able to use all their little Emacs keyboard shortcuts and everything else. You know how those text editor people are, right? Weirdos. Anyway, bottom line is we can give them an experience where .NET can be theirs too. So we have choice in our tool chain. But then beyond that, it gets even better. We actually have open source frameworks being built in .NET now, like Akka.NET and Helios and .NETty and others that allow you to do things you couldn't do before, like distributed application development, like really good socket programming. And there's more and more that are coming out all the time. As a result of some of the changes that Microsoft started to introduce a couple of years ago, the .NET open source ecosystem's starting to look like a place that people won't make fun of anymore. Because if there's one thing I can't stand as a .NET developer, it's being pitied by JavaScript developers. So our tool chain is becoming exciting. And speaking of which, did I mention like every single open source development framework out there is starting to actually try to support .NET? DataStax has an amazing driver for C#. Solar and Elasticsearch and any number of the other major NoSQL technologies like MongoDB and React all support great drivers in .NET now. You don't have to be me circa 2013 angrily yelling at fluent Cassandra as I'm trying to figure out how thrift works. You don't have to do that anymore because the rest of the open source ecosystem the non-.NET parts of it, have recognized that there's a huge population of developers here who are working on really important stuff. .NET runs the world. Every single major financial company, and healthcare company, and automotive company, and manufacturing company has major parts of their business built in .NET. And so the rest of the open source ecosystem gets that now, and they're supporting us. So we have an availability of tools that we've never been able to touch before outside the .NET ecosystem, and that's exciting. We are totally free of the handcuffs that we've had when the show was totally being run by Microsoft's product release cycle. That excuse of having to wait for Microsoft, and that weird trade-off we'd have to make where, oh, we'll catch you on the next product release from Redmond. That's no longer the case anymore. We can be agile. And not to rip on JavaScript developers again, but it's time for us to start being the predators and not the prey anymore when it comes to innovation. We can be nimble, we can be fast, and we can experiment at a scale that's been unprecedented in .NET. So there's really no more excuses. Jason Calacanis, a famous investor, one of the early investors in Uber and a number of other companies, once said that if you're not building a 5-star app, nobody cares. And that's really the state of the ecosystem for software, is that users expect us to be available, they expect us to be responsive, and they expect us to deliver more. And we have to do that while retaining orders of magnitude more data than we've ever had before. With this stack, we actually have the platform to go and do that at a scale that is not only unprecedented in .NET, but did I mention that this is really fun to develop in? This is an opportunity for us to all fall in love with .NET again. So let's dig into a little bit more detail on what the stack's really about. So I mentioned that the stack actually begins with a change in our mindset as developers. So in education, there's these two ideas of a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And let me tell you what the difference between those two is. A fixed mindset is the default that people have. And if you have children, a fixed mindset occurs for them when you praise their results as a function of who they are. If I did really well in a spelling bee, my mom goes, oh, you're a genius, you're a great speller. Then I believe I'm a genius and a great speller. And so if I get put into a situation where I can't spell very well anymore, it threatens my identity as a genius. And so I go and retreat back to my comfort zone, stay in that little fixed worldview that I have about myself. Whereas a growth-oriented mindset is you praise the results of a child based as a function of their effort. You put a lot of work into really learning how to ace that spelling bee, and that's why you did a good job. Or you know what? I bet you could do even better next time if you worked even harder at it. And as a result, those kids go on to look at challenges as growth opportunities. Even if they fail and they don't get the perfect answer, they know they're going to come out of it with all the effort they put into it. And so how that applies to .NET is partly because of the rails that Microsoft has had us on. We have this very fixed worldview about what developing for .NET looks like and what sort of experiences we can deliver. Oh, well, SQL Server and ASP.NET, CRUD applications can't do it. Must be impossible, right? Or the alternative, well, if we can't do this with this setup, maybe we should just throw a lot more hardware at it and see what happens. There's a sort of a dearth of innovation there because we really haven't had a lot of room to grow and actually take risks and experiments. So in a growth-oriented mindset, we can stop trying to put the cart before the horse here and start really going after new ways of building applications and new ways of structuring our teams and new ways of deploying our experiences and delivering them to customers and basically put everything to the test. So growth-oriented mindset really depends on having choice available to us in how we do things, and we have that now. So we need to change our mindset so we can take advantage of it. So that's where the platform begins, bringing the possibility of choice and freedom and improvement to your team. And when you do that, we can start digging into the real tangible benefits of the rest of the stack. So for instance, with Windows Azure offers two things that make it really compelling to me My last startup, by the way, was built totally in AWS. So I'm a hardcore Amazon user, so I know what's out there. But what Azure has that's extremely compelling as a platform is their new service fabric, platform as a service, is really designed to build enterprise scale applications. Now, as Billy said, like, we're not all trying to build, cat video applications out there, right? A lot of us are trying to build things like banking infrastructure or being able to do Internet of Things for oil and gas pipelines. These are actual use cases that show up in my inbox here at Petabridge. And Microsoft has really developed Azure into a platform where you can support those sorts of use cases on the cloud now. And the second thing they've got going is a great ecosystem of partners like DataStax and Tengen and Hortonworks and others who are all committed to being able to deliver open source experiences for .NET developers on Azure. So with that ecosystem in mind, we can treat Azure like a playground to rapidly experiment and try and test things. And even if, if your business still has its own data center and it needs to keep some things on premise for privacy or compliance reasons, you can still use Azure for the parts of it that aren't bound by that. It's not an all or nothing game, right? So Azure really is the playground that we're going to use to experiment with this growth mindset. Next is Cassandra. So I assume you're all here because you're at least somewhat aware of the benefits of it. I mean, hence the conference, right? What Cassandra really gives us that we never had with SQL Server is a scaling model and a reliability and availability model that makes sense and is easy to predict. I worked with, I had a DBA at my previous job who I would peg him in the top 500 SQL Server users in the world. He's that good. He's better than most of the ones I worked with at Microsoft. And even he couldn't tell you, if he designed the data model from scratch and managed everything using the best practices that he knows, what a SQL Server workload will look like under unpredictable load. He couldn't plot that on a histogram for you. You can do that with Cassandra. You're going to get a linearly scalable performance, which means that your load relative to your hardware, if you manage that ratio consistently, you're going to deliver consistently fast and available response times to your users. And I'm going to give you some metrics at the very end of this talk you can bring back to work to support that. Next is Spark. So Spark might be the most exciting thing that's happened to the data ecosystem. Hell, I bet half the sessions going on at Cassandra Summit right now are about it. What Spark gives us the ability to do is cleanly separate our operational metrics from our analytical ones. We can go and keep our app workload on Cassandra and have consistent, predictable performance there, while still using Spark to deal with our ETL workload and our analytic workload. And we can write it back out to tools that we already use. God knows that there's a massive piece of infrastructure built on top of SQL Server for reporting and analysis and you name it, right? So being able to use Spark to allow us to take advantage of the innovation of NoSQL, but still support our business users inside our own company is an amazing asset. And Spark has similarly linear scalability performance too. Then at the runtime. So as I've mentioned before, we have platform choice now. You can develop on Windows, deploy on Linux. And then the other exciting thing we get is the programming model. So the actor model in Akka.NET. This is the thing that really got me excited about being a .NET developer again 2 years ago, was that I could build applications that I thought were impossible. So like the real-time marketing automation platform I'm going to tell you about in I think 3 slides, being one example. We've also seen people building multiplayer games, building trading platforms, and for some reason, a lot of them build gambling systems on top of it. I don't know why, but I digress. The point is, with Akka.NET and the programming model it exposes, all of the same performance and scaling characteristics that we love about SQL Server are things that we can build into our own applications now. And lastly, the front end. A quick note to Microsoft, if you watch the recording of this, start adding logos to your projects if you want them included in talks like this. So Nancy's going to get the front page here. The bottom line with our front-end stack in .NET is that we have available to us now great cross-platform tools for doing WebSockets, for doing web APIs, and doing just simple web applications. Nancy and ASP.NET vNext and SignalR and Web API all work equally well on Linux as they do on Windows. And you should see some of the metrics Microsoft's putting out about Kestrel, the new web server that powers ASP.NET vNext. It might outperform IIS in no short period of time. So there's a lot of exciting innovation happening here too. We've got possibility all around us in the .NET stack. I'm going to share with you a story now about how I put that to work for me at my previous company, Marked Up. So we were a real-time analytics and marketing automation platform for Windows Store, Windows Phone, and Windows Desktop developers. So they'd embed our SDK into their app, and we'd allow them to do things like send targeted offers to users based on what their behavior was. And one of the things that we learned that we had to be able to do with our marketing automation product was we had to be able to serve those offers within seconds, like 3 seconds, of a user qualifying for a campaign. Otherwise, the performance of that campaign would decrease by an order of magnitude. Like, that's the difference, like 30 seconds was the difference between a 4% conversion rate versus 3 seconds, which would be a 40% conversion rate. We were able to measure that. So we picked this stack, the new .NET stack. We used Amazon Web Services, Cassandra, Akka.NET, and ASP.NET. And here's what we were able to deliver. 30 million distinct devices per month would connect to our service. And they would write upwards of 500 megs of event data per second. These aren't images going into a CDN. This is the actual stuff hitting our load balancer for our REST API and going through our application at peak hours. That is a lot of information. And that resulted in about 100 million database transactions per day. And that includes batch writes, so we're modifying 30 or 40 counters at once. And you know what? We could handle that entire workload on 30 medium-sized servers on Amazon. These are servers with 2 to 4 cores. Not big at all. And we're able to do all of this with a team of 3 developers. So the last little part, the developer metrics here. Our code footprint, when we built this application with this stack versus a traditional ASP.NET CRUD and OO stack, was 83% smaller. Akka.NET, which is the actor model framework I told you about, gives you the ability to express all of the different parts of your application in very simple, discrete parts that can be easily parallelized and run concurrently across multiple machines. So it has this amazing ability to atomize and reduce the size of your code. So, quick question. Who thinks that code that's 83% smaller is going to be at least 83% easier to debug? How about 83% easier to train new developers on? How about, the list goes on. There's enormous benefits to being able to do this. The turnaround time to build this entire marketing automation product from an idea on a sheet of paper in the back of a napkin to actually being in production was 6 months, with a team of 3 developers. But the amount of fun we had developing on this stack was amazing. I think, is that 10,000% more? 100,000% more. And it's really difficult to express just how different the experience of being a .NET developer felt when we were able to use Cassandra. We were able to use DSC Search and Solr. We were able to use Akka.NET. And now that, this is a couple of years ago that we did this. Today, I could go and run this on Linux with Docker. And I could go and use, ASP.NET vNext to go and actually run, all the fun front-end stuff that we had to try to do, cobble together by hand before. This stack is even better now than it was a couple of years ago. But these are some pretty incredible numbers I've shown you. So I want to end today's talk with a question. What's next for you? And what could be made possible for you if you brought this to your company and made it work? And I would assert the answer is anything. You could really make anything possible, and you could be a leader who's able to champion innovation on your team, enhance the careers of all you people, and deliver a better experience for your users than you ever could before. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to take some questions. Please put your hand up, and he'll bring a microphone by. I got to ask for one brave person to break the ice, because then everyone else will ask questions. There we go.
So yeah, you mentioned mono as part of this, and it's always been that little bastard stepchild. So can you elaborate a little bit more on, you're saying so they're really going to bring that up, or is the common CLR? I mean, because it seems like there's always going to be that contention between the two, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what's mono's role in a world where core CLR is being developed? And here's my assertion on that. The core CLR is still going to be released at the speed of Microsoft. Even though the core CLR is being developed out in the open and it's open source, you're still going to be subject to the, Microsoft has 3,000 lawyers, man. They're going to travel at a speed that's not even comparable to mono. The role that I think mono has is it's trying to be more like the full footprint of .NET, but on POSIX-based systems. So mono should be able to support anything that you could do in the CLR on POSIX, whereas the core CLR is designed to be about 10% the size of .NET. It's a really small footprint, so it's like 40 megs versus 400. And that's so it can be Dockerized and deployed multiple times on the same host machine, right? So the real difference between the two, I think, is going to come down to which parts of the framework do you need. If you're just running a web application and you don't need anything crazy like, I don't know, C++ CLI, or being able to do p-invoke or anything like that, then core CLR will get the job done. But if you've got a little heavier duty application and maybe it has some legacy stuff built into it, mono is going to be the tool of choice for that in Linux. And mono is definitely not going away. Unity 3D and Xamarin are too big to let anything happen to it. So I think what you're going to continue to see is that mono is always going to be available, and it's always going to be innovated on. And it's really up to the community, so to speak, to say what do they want to do with it on the server. And overwhelmingly, there's a lot of push from companies that Andrew and I work with to actually try to move off of Windows. They still want to develop in .NET, but they don't want to be tied to Windows licensing, and they definitely don't want to be tied to the dearth of Windows like configuration management and deployment tools. So, good question. Who's next? Guess I need a second icebreaker. There we go.
How's the current support in Akka.NET for Core CLR?
So current support for Akka.NET and Core CLR. So we have one contributor and a fork who's actually got most of it running. I think the thing he's trying to work on now is the networking stack. So we have all the core actor framework running on Core CLR, but the stuff like Akka.persistence, Akka.remote, Akka.cluster, anything that really depends on either a database driver or a Helios, the socket server, all that stuff needs to be ported to Core CLR in order for it to work. So we don't officially support Core CLR yet, but that is going to change as Core CLR matures, because it's still in an alpha state right now. And our goal, just to give you our sort of state of the union on Akka.NET, we think Core CLR should be the default way server-side developers build their applications. We think that's going to be the case over the next 18 months. But we need to see progress in Core CLR first before we start moving the framework that way. Because where most of our users are right now, I mean, often I get asked about .NET 3.5 and 4.0 support for Akka.NET. It's like daily. So we've got a little bit of work to do on bringing the rest of the ecosystem out of 2008 before we jump ahead to 2016. So yeah. One more. We got one more shot, guys. I think we got time for one more question. Be brave. I'm gentle. There we go.
What are some pain points using Microsoft Azure and the framework?
What are some pain points using Microsoft Azure? Do we have time for another 40-minute talk? The answer with some of the pain points. Cloud services, let's say the current version of Azure Pass. For anything that's not a stateless web application, using SQL Azure is a living hell to work with. And the reason why I say that is one of the things you should never do if you're building developer tools is try to be really smart about what the other developer's trying to do. And so Azure will go and do things like, oh, we'll just go ahead and start rebooting servers and all that sort of stuff and update the hypervisor under the hood. And so if you're like me, and I do stateful application development, doing that with this unpredictable, chaos monkey rolling around nuking my servers every month, it can be really difficult. On top of that, there's a lot of little management stuff they do under the hood that doesn't make full sense to me. And then the most painful part with cloud services is the fact that I have to basically take my Visual Studio solution and totally rewrite it in order to work with Windows Azure at all. Like I've got to go and wrap all my Windows services into a worker role project and do all that stuff. So the experience around that is still kind of gnarly. With Service Fabric, the new version of PaaS they're releasing, you'll be able to deploy like Dockerized, like Docker images and run with those, which will make things a lot nicer than it is now. So that's one pain point that I think is addressed already in the things Microsoft's announced. But I've personally, and actually pretty recently, been pretty frustrated by that particular one. All right, well, everyone, thanks for attending today. And if you have questions about the new .NET Stack, Andrew, raise your hand real quick. Andrew and I will be outside in the hallway available to talk more. All right, thank you.